and I enjoyed it. We also went to the Ford Museum. We went to two places. We went to the River Rouge Ford factory, which is where they make the F-150. And it's also where Maxine was made. So it's also the exact same building where my Mustang was made, which was really kind of cool because I was standing there like, oh, this is neat. And then Morning Sky.
What do you find in the history?
And I found crazy stuff in that history museum. Yeah. So this is the thing. The Ford Museum of Innovation, which I expected to be full of like inventions and things, and it was, had a whole American history section, and it had a whole civil rights section, and they were the best ones I've seen. And in the American history section, they had like, they did a nice job of blending it right into the civil rights section. But they had in the American history section, they had like letters written by George Washington to some of his, like those that were under his command, like in his handwriting. That was pretty cool. And they had the camp bed that he slept on, which was really cool. Like, and it was really, really long because he was really tall, right? Hey, good morning. Hey, look, I got something for you. And so, this one's you. Yes. Hey, Louis, welcome back.
Thank you.
And they had the rocking chair that Abraham Lincoln was sitting in when he was assassinated. It still has the blood stains on it.
Yay.
It was the wildest thing, though. I mean, it was a really neat thing. And then they also had the other thing I thought was really cool. Over towards the civil rights section, they had the bus that Rosa Parks sat in. I mean, you could go sit in the actual seat. Like it was, the bus itself had been completely renovated. So it's not like the actual seat, but that's because it was in a field for years, just run down. And then they restored it completely. But there were cool things in that museum. So if you ever go to Detroit, the River Rouge tour with the factory is pretty darn cool. But I'm telling you, the Ford Museum of Innovation, we were there probably 4 hours. I could have stayed 8. That's how much stuff is in there. I guess the most prominent thing is, so they have this, you seen steam engines before? So they have a steam engine in there that wouldn't fit on the first level of this house. It's huge. Like it would be bigger than this whole level. It's a huge, huge, huge machine. And Henry Ford had 9 of them built to power the equipment at the River Rouge factory. So there was massive steam engines, 9 of them built in order to create enough electricity to run the equipment that made the Model T. That's how old they were. And they were huge. The flywheel on that thing was probably, I would say 25 feet in diameter. It was huge. So really cool. All right.
We went to Utah last week.
Oh, yeah.
I was going to say, where did you go on vacation? Utah.
It was snowing and everything, and skiing was fun. But we, the day after we got back, we saw 2 lizards on our deck, and we thought, oh, we'll bring one to science to show everyone. We didn't catch one. We tried so hard.
Very hard to catch, aren't they?
I nearly chopped off one's tail.
Oh my gracious. So actually, when I was a kid, I visited my aunt and her family in Phoenix, and they have lizards that they call wall lizards. And they're about the size of our anoles, but they're grayish, but they have all these wall lizards. And because people in Phoenix, for whatever reason, don't have fences, they have brick walls around their yards. And so these lizards are all the time crawling up the wall. Well, they had a Gordon setter named Britain, and she loved to chase the wall lizards, and she would chase them up the wall, but it was the grossest thing. You know, the fingernails on the chalkboard, how that makes you go, ah? Okay, so this dog would run up the wall and she would bite the wall and scrape her teeth up as she tried to catch these lizards. Her bottom teeth were worn to little nubs, and she did it all the time. It was like, ooh, every time she did it. Like gross.
One of the lizards we were trying to catch was that green lizard with the pouch.
The anoles, aren't they pretty? So today we're moving on to the nervous system. Your lab today should be fun. You're gonna need at least, you're gonna need at least 2 people from your team to be the subject, but we can probably have a lot more subjects if that's what we choose to do. And so it should be really cool. And we're also, I have set up in the dining room for you, if you care to look, I have some books on neurology. I have a little tiny model brain that you can take apart and put back together. And I have actually, I pulled out the science symposium from my senior year in college, because one of my friends did a really cool write-up on mapping of the crayfish nervous system. So I have her research paper there, and oh, another little book on the brain. And then on the other side of the room, I have 2 microscopes, and then I have a whole bunch of slides, and some of them are prepared slides that we, got when we bought all the slides, and some of them are slides I made back in like 1997. But there's mouse brain, mouse cerebrum, and then that's unstained, and then there's stained mouse cerebrum, and there's crayfish nerve cord that are all there. And there are also some digestive tissues, because we didn't get to put any of those up last week when we were doing the digestive system. So there's some over there if you want to look. So help yourself once we get into lab. All right, so we are doing today our nervous system, lesson 29. We are off the next 2 weeks. You know that, right? We have a spring break, and then we have Holy Week, which is always a break for me. I don't teach that week. So you guys have 2 weeks in a row. That's great.
Holy Week, we only had Thursday and Friday off at my house.
Yeah.
I
I do a lot Holy Week besides just going to church, because I sing all of Holy Week. So I sing Thursday, I sing Friday, I sing Saturday, and I sing twice on Sunday. So it's busy for me.
I don't get any month on Holy Week.
You're not busy enough. So here we go. Stimulus and response we talked about before. So the stimulus here is seeing a predator, and the response would be running away. So somebody else give me an example. Oh, Darcy and Lewis missed this last week, but I have the coins now. And if you want them, you have to answer the questions I asked. So can somebody give me an example of a stimulus and a response? Darcy's hand is up. Yes.
A response to a stimulus would be, so yeah, like you drag your nails down the blackboard, you flinch, and the stimulus would be dragging you down.
That's right. What's yours?
So, say if a burglar was trying to catch you or like
Yeah.
kidnap you,
And
the stimulus was him having a sack, trying to get a sack over your head.
Oh, okay.
And the response was you were trying to fight him back.
You are very dark, Lewis. I like you. All right. Who else has one? Lily, anybody? Drew, Claire, Colson, what you got?
Stimulus could be like dropping something on your butt, and the response may be moving your foot away.
Yes, that's good. All right, we'll do another one now. Well, no, you already gave one. Yep.
When there's a hot stove and you put your hand on the hot stove, the stimulus is to put it on, the response to pull it away.
Right. The stimulus is the heat part. All right, we already got one from you. We'll ask another question later. Lily, you don't want to add one? You sure? That's easy. Easy money. Okay. So, well, yeah, that one, you can't give that one. So the neuron, all right, your neuron is basically your basic functional unit of your nervous system, and it's a cell. So it makes sense because your cells are your basic function of living things, right? Your basic structure. So nervous system is going to collect information about your body's internal and external environment, and that's going to process and respond to it. So sometimes it's easy to remember that your nervous system is collecting information from outside your body, but don't forget that it's also collecting information from inside your body. Like if you are thirsty, that's the stimulus is I'm thirsty, and that your body has created that stimulus so that you will respond by getting some water. So you have a peripheral nervous system, and that's all the nerves and all of the supporting cells that collect information about the body's internal and external environment. So basically, this is anything that's not your brain and spinal cord. It's all the rest of your nerves. So if you hear about people having like peripheral neuropathy, sometimes you'll hear about that. That's meaning basically they've got pain or dysfunction somewhere in a nerve that is at some other place in their body besides their brain or spinal cord. So like right now with this Parsonage-Turner thing I got going, it's actually a type of, well, the effect is a type of peripheral neuropathy. So let's see what else we have. We also have our CNS. So you have PNS and your CNS, PNS, CNS. Your CNS is your central nervous system, so that's your brain and your spinal cord. And it's going to process that information and create a response. And it's going to deliver it through the peripheral. So your peripheral nervous system is going to pick it up and it's going to send it to your central nervous system where it's going to get processed. Now, some things are going to get processed in the brain, and there's some other things that actually get processed in your spinal cord. They don't even make it all the way to your brain because it's got to be a quick response. So that's kind of interesting. But then your central nervous system is going to throw it right back. So it's almost like taking a ball and bouncing it off a wall and having it come right back to you. It's that same sort of idea. So nervous system impulses are transmitted by cells called neurons. So there are 3 types of neurons. You have sensory, motor, and interneuron. So your sensory ones are the ones that pick up information from either inside or outside. And then you've got your motor ones. These are the ones that move your muscles. They tell your muscles to move. And then your interneurons are all the ones in between that do the connecting. So all of them have certain features. So you've got a cell body that contains a nucleus and cytoplasm, just like all of our other cells do, right? And then you have these things called dendrites. So you guys are used to cells being just these little round things, right? And neurons are very different. They have these little branches that come off of them, and those are called dendrites. They look almost like little tree branches. They have little fingers and everything. And then they have this thing called an axon, which is this long tail, okay? And that's this long fiber, and it's going to carry the impulses away from the cell. So the dendrites, you can think of them almost like little hands, and they're reaching out, trying to take information in. And then your axon is this long tail, and it's going to send the information out. Now, in a lot of your neurons, the axon, this long tail, is covered in this thing called a myelin sheath. And it's really interesting because the myelin sheath, I'll show you here in this picture. So here's your dendrites, like your little hands reaching out. Here's your axon, this big long tail. And this is what you call your axon terminal. It's the end, okay? So these guys right here, this is myelin sheath. And sometimes they have little Schwann cells in them, and then this little thing in between, they call it a node of Ranvier. I cannot speak today. So here's the thing. When you send an impulse down this neuron, it's not going to go like this. It's actually slower if it does that. Instead, what it's going to do is going to go bing, 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 and jump down it. It's called saltatory movement when you jump. So like a kangaroo moves with saltatory movement. It's like a salto if you've done dance or gymnastics. So it's going to jump right like this because it's faster. Now there is a disease that is not all that uncommon. It's an autoimmune disease. A lot of people probably heard of it. Actually, is it autoimmune? Yeah, I think so. But it causes this myelin sheath to deteriorate and sometimes disappear. And that disease is multiple sclerosis. You heard of anybody who has MS? You know anybody that has MS?
I've seen the advert.
Does anybody know anybody with MS? So my mom's best friend, her late husband had MS. Eventually he died of it. Our priest has MS. And it's usually, tends to be common in women, but men can get it too, obviously, because I've known 2 men with it. But it affects your ability to function, move normally. Because obviously all of these nerve impulses are taking longer to get where they're going. And like sometimes our priest, like he'll be standing there like reading from the gospel book or something, and he'll get ready to turn around and go back to the altar, and his feet don't move. It's like he's telling his foot, pick up and go to the next step, but it won't go no matter what he tells it. And that happens sometimes, and it takes him a second, and then finally it'll lift. So it's a weird thing. One time he kneeled for a long time and he had a whole lot of trouble getting up. So some days he has a cane and other days he doesn't. It just depends on what help he needs. So this myelin sheath is very important. I want you to notice something. You see how these are all shaped like little fingers? And these right here are shaped like almost like little balls or little nodes. So what happens is you've got these little cups on your dendrites. They're almost like little cups. And then your axon terminals are like a little ball going into a socket almost. And they don't actually touch. There's a gap between where your dendrite is and where your axon terminal is, there's a little tiny gap, itty bitty gap. And what happens there is these chemicals called neurotransmitters float back and forth and go from one to the other. And so those are things like serotonin, oxytocin, stuff like that. So if you've ever heard of anybody taking a SSRI, it's a serotonin reuptake inhibitor. So that's something like Zoloft or Prozac, and those kind of medications actually allow more serotonin to stay in that, it's called a synapse, this little area. And there's more free serotonin in that area, and it doesn't get passed as quickly. And that actually can change people's mood and the way their brain works. So it's pretty cool, pretty cool. So this is a quick little video that gives you some idea of how like your neurons form and they build your brain. Let's hope it goes well.
Brains.
Yep.
Sure.
Oh, it would help if there was volume. Hold on, volume. Oopsie. Come on. Did this get turned off? My gracious, it did. I had no idea. Usually it's on and good and loud most of the time. All right, let's try again. Sorry. That's the one thing I didn't check because it's nearly always on. Oh, go away, ad with your whatever. Okay, here we go.
A child's experiences during the earliest years of life have a impact on the architecture of the developing brain. Genes provide the basic blueprint, but experiences shape the process that determines whether a child's brain will provide a strong or weak foundation for all future learning, behavior, and health. During this important period of brain development, billions of brain cells called neurons send electrical signals to communicate with each other. These connections form circuits that become the basic foundation of brain architecture. Circuits and connections proliferate at a rapid pace and are reinforced through repeated use. Our experiences and environment dictate which circuits and connections get more. Connections that are used more grow stronger and more permanent. Meanwhile, connections that are used less fade away through a normal process called pruning. Well-used circuits create lightning-fast pathways for neural signals to travel across regions of the brain. Simple circuits form first, providing a foundation for more complex circuits to build on later. Through this process, neurons form strong circuits and connections for emotions, motor skills, behavioral control, logic, language, and memory during the early critical period of development. With repeated use, these circuits become more efficient and connect to other areas of the brain more rapidly. While they originate in specific areas of the brain, the circuits are interconnected. You can't have one type of skill without the others to support it. Like building a house, everything is connected, and what comes first forms a foundation for all that comes later.
So there are certain activities that you can do that actually help those circuits connect more quickly and help them build stronger because they use all different parts of your brain at one time. If you're using all the different parts of your brain at one time, or more than one part of your brain at one time, it actually can reinforce all of those types of connections. So like playing an instrument is a great example, because when you're playing an instrument, you're reading the music, which is a type of language. Sheet music is a language. So you're reading the music, you're interpreting it, you are listening to it, and you are moving your muscles. So you've got motor memory going. And you know what muscle memory is? You hear about muscle memory, right? Like you say you change the cabinet that you used to keep your glasses in. How many times are you going to reach, not even thinking about it, in the old cabinet? Like it's going to happen 50 times because that's what you're used to doing. And that's because that connection has grown. But this is where the idea of if you don't use it, you lose it comes from. Like you guys that are learning Spanish right now, if you decide to quit Spanish and never talk it or listen to it or read it again, you will forget a lot of it. Like I took almost 6 years of French. I was pretty much entirely fluent when I was in college. Like you could have dropped me in the middle of Paris and I would have been fine. Well, not Paris because they all speak English. Countryside, how about that? I would have been completely fine.
Well, you wouldn't have been fine if they just dropped.
Yeah, but now, true. Now, I remember some, but I don't remember nearly enough. Now, because I still have some connections, they're weak, it would be easier for me to pick it up again. Like if I started all over again and tried to learn it, I'd be like, oh yeah. So those connections would strengthen again and again.
I used to do Spanish in 1st and 2nd grade, but then I quit it and didn't do anything for a really long time. Then
Yep.
did French. Now I'm pretty good at French.
There you go. There you go. So it's very important to reinforce those neurons. So that's why they're saying if you do it again and again and again, it strengthens that connection. So this is how you study too. Like if you want to study and you really want to remember something, you go over it again and again and again, even if you think you know it. And other things that strengthen it, like we said, is when you're using different parts of your body. So if you are listening to me and taking notes at the same time, you're moving your hand, you're looking with your eyes, you're hearing with your ears, you're interpreting with the memory part of your brain, all of that is going to help you remember it better than if you just sat and listened. That's just how it works. So next one. Okay, so you have the brain and spinal cord. This says central nervous system at the top, but this little thing's in the middle. There it is. So your central nervous system is your brain and your spinal cord. So that's this bit right in here, right? None of the rest of it. The rest of it's all peripheral. So your brain and your spinal cord are what compose your central nervous system, and some kinds of information like reflexes. These are the things that are processed right in the spinal cord. So, you know, when you go to the doctor and they tap your knee and your leg kind of jumps a little, that's the patellar tendon, and they tap it makes your leg jump a little. That's a reflex. They'll do it on your elbows too. They'll tap it here and they look for a tiny movement. Sometimes you get a big one. Like I've been hit where I'm like, whoa, your leg just kicks.
The stimulus is being hit by the hammer.
Yeah. And the response is it kicking back. That's right. So these are all things that your central nervous system will do. So things like your reflexes are going to be processed right in your spinal cord. They don't even make it to your brain. But if you think about it, you think about how quickly your brain does things, it's pretty wild. Like say you do a Google search on something and it takes maybe 1 second for your screen to pull up. If somebody asked you, what's your cousin's name? You would spit it out immediately. That's how much, yeah, which cousin, but that's how much faster your brain is than a computer. They did have a computer that they built for Jeopardy called Watson. Have you ever seen that?
Oh yeah.
So Watson competed on Jeopardy, and that computer was pretty darn good. It was very fast.
Artificial intelligence.
So your reflex is this automatic response to a stimulus. It's automatic because it goes right to your spinal cord. It doesn't involve your brain. It doesn't involve any thinking. So we're going to do a little interesting thing here for a second. So this guy here. So you've got, whoop, can't see it. So the largest region of the human brain is the cerebrum. Okay, that's everything up here, excluding this stuff. This is your cerebellum and your brainstem. So it's all this business. And your cerebrum has regions, right? It's got your frontal lobe, your temporal lobe, your parietal lobe, your occipital lobe. So for example, your frontal lobe does a lot of your thinking and reasoning. And when my dad had his stroke, his first stroke, he had it here in his left temporal lobe, which is exactly this lobe we're looking at here. So it's left temporal. So this is the largest part of the human brain, and it controls your learning, your judgment, your voluntary actions of your muscles. So stuff like walking is voluntary. Fascinating though, when you decide to get up and start walking, you have to think about it for a second. But once you're walking, do you really think about putting one foot in front of the other? You don't think about it, but your brain is processing all of that with every step you take. Every step you take, your brain is in this constant loop. So your cerebrum is divided into right and left hemispheres, kind of like the globe, but the other way around, the right and left instead of top and bottom. And each deals primarily with the opposite side of the body. So if you have damage to your left hemisphere, it's going to affect the right part of your body. So my dad's stroke was in his left temporal lobe, and he lost function on the right side of his body, and goes the same way on the other side. So they're crossed, which is kind of interesting. So you've heard of people being left-brained and right-brained before, right? You probably heard that, oh, he's left-brained, oh, he's right-brained. So we're going to watch our favorite scientist here in a second, Professor Dave, right? So, but we are going to do this. So you have dominance. How many of you are right-handed?
Raise your right hand if you're right.
Most people are right-handed. Now, do you know your dominant eye? Raise your hand if you know your dominant eye. I know you do because you shoot. you know yours? Okay, so here's how you do this.
Left eye.
So everybody do this. So you're gonna take your hands and you're gonna make a tiny little hole, okay? Now find something in the room to look at. For you guys, it might be good to maybe look at like that red heart at the front of the dog, okay? So what you do is you're gonna pull this straight to your face, keeping both eyes open, and you're gonna look at that red heart and you're gonna pull it right to your face. And if you pull it to the wrong eye, you'll see your hands crossing. But if you pull it to your dominant eye, it's gonna go right straight to it. So is anybody right-handed with a left dominance eye? So you are, Cole is, yep. Are you? Was yours left and right? Okay, so if you're left eye dominant and right-handed, they call it cross dominance. Or they also call it, what's the other one they call it? Cross laterality is the other one. Yes, so that's interesting. So the reason we found out Cole was cross dominant with was eyes cross dominant was that, yeah, when he was shooting a rifle, then they're supposed to catch this at Boy Scouts when they teach you to shoot BB guns. But when you shoot a rifle, if you're right-handed but left eye dominant, you have to learn to shoot with your left hand, because otherwise you're bending way over it. Like if you're holding like this, you can't bend way over it. That's not good. So you have to hold it this way. So that's how we found out. They didn't catch it. Some guy at Bass Pro Shops caught it when he was like looking at one.
My dad was playing with a BB gun, and he was like really young.
Uh-huh.
He's got a hole behind his ear now.
Oh, yep, that'll do it.
Actually, like it's right there.
Yep, that'll do it. That'll do it.
Great uncle was playing with a BB gun,
Mm-hmm.
and he got it stuck in his palm, and
Ow.
like he didn't tell his mom, and he never got it removed until about 10 years later. So
Yeah.
his mom didn't even know about it.
So other things that, other thing.
A little screen thing you write sometimes. I want to write down.
Oh, I'll have it for you. So there's some other things that can determine where you have dominance, but this doesn't necessarily mean that you have a, like you're left-brained or right-brained. That's not how it works. People like this is trying to tell you, this little graphic's trying to tell you that's the way it is, and it's not totally. So like I'm right-handed and I'm right eye dominant, but it says circle the ear you use to listen through a door. So if you're gonna listen through a door, think about it. Which ear are you gonna use? I'm gonna use my right.
I'm gonna use my left ear.
See, I use my right, but I put headphones in my left, I guess because I want to hear what's going on in the background in my right, because I don't put a headphone in my
I do
left,
that.
right?
I'm gonna put
So then I use my right hand to write. Now think about it. If you're going to kick a ball, which foot are you going to use?
left.
I'm going to use my right. And this also can be shown, like if you go to do a cartwheel, which way are you going to do a cartwheel? Like all of these things are some sort of dominance, right? So Professor Dave here is going to explain why it's not really a left brain, right brain thing. Because people want to break it down like that.
Hey, I'm Dave. And I'm Joel. Let's talk about brains.
About science stuff, Professor Dave explains. Gotta love Professor Dave, man.
Harry Potter.
Yeah, shh, listen.
For witchcraft and wizardry in the Harry Potter series.
Listen.
Students are sorted into different houses by a magic hat based on their personalities. Similarly, in elementary school, a teacher may have declared one side of your brain stronger than the other based on your personality. If you're a creative or artistic type, you would have been identified as right brain. If you're an analytical or mathematical type, you would have been identified as left brain.
I'm left brain.
I'm
You might
right
have learned
brain.
to use
Well, listen.
your brain to choose a college or a career. And while we each have a unique set of talents and abilities, there's no such thing as being right-brained or left-brained.
Not in the way your school teacher explained it to you anyway. And if there were such a thing, almost all of us would be left-brained. The left cerebral hemisphere controls the right side of the body. And about 90% of people prefer to write with their right hand, indicating left brain motor dominance. Moreover, language skills are left lateralized or largely controlled by the left hemisphere in over 90% of people. That includes 78% of people who are not right-handed.
Does this mean that the remaining few with language in the right hemisphere are right-brained? More likely, these individuals have, on average, the same skills and talents as the other 90% of us left-brained folks. The place in the brain where language is localized just happens to be different.
The left cerebral hemisphere is to the right brain poet or novelist as the hamstrings and quadriceps are to a competitive sprinter. Because the ability to understand and produce language is focused in the left of the brain in almost everyone,
Caricaturing these creative types as using their right brain more than their left brain is just plain silly.
Similarly, visual spatial abilities, which are localized to the right cerebral,
Speak.
are skills that are absolutely critical for left brain talents like science or engineering. The ability to interpret algebraic equations in terms of geometric curves is a specialty of the right brain.
Now we're behind.
So where did this right-left mythology come from? As we mentioned, some skills are indeed strongly lateralized to one hemisphere of the brain. But much of our obsession with the brain's left and right cerebral hemispheres may have started with studies of split-brain patients in the 50s. During this time, people who suffered multiple seizures a day underwent intense surgery to treat their epilepsy.
To calm the electrical storms that ravaged these patients' brains, the nerve fibers connecting the left and right cerebral hemispheres of the brain were cut. These fibers are collectively known as the corpus callosum. As a once bright highway of information goes quiet, consciousness changes in profound ways, and the specialties of each cerebral hemisphere are more easily disentangled.
Once the corpus callosum is severed on the operating table, the new split-brain patient appears astonishingly normal at first glance, but careful experiments reveal that this person is really two persons, two streams of consciousness in one body. These experiments, performed by Nobel laureate Roger Sperry, found clever ways of feeding information to only one side of the body, and therefore only the cerebral hemisphere controlling that side of the body.
In one experiment, the right hemisphere was shown an image of a snow scene, while the left hemisphere was shown a picture of a chicken. The right hemisphere was instructed to select an image of an object to match the presented scene. After selecting an appropriate object, a snow shovel, the split-brain patient is asked to justify this selection. Remember, only the left hemisphere, which saw the chicken, can speak. Because only the left hemisphere can speak, the patient would give a response such as, "I can use this to shovel out the chicken coop."
So why did the left hemisphere give this answer? Not being able to see the snow scene, the left hemisphere doesn't know that the shovel was selected to shovel snow. Thus, this separate stream of consciousness invents a new reason involving the chicken scene that it can see.
The right hemisphere cannot speak, but it can point to words like yes or no to answer a question. Neurologist V.S. Ramachandran tells a story of a split-brain patient who was asked whether he believes in God. The right hemisphere pointed to yes, while the left hemisphere declared no. Each hemisphere, it seems, maintains independent beliefs and personalities, challenging the notion that we're each an indivisible self.
But this does not justify the pop psychology concept of left brain or right brain. The two hemispheres are different, yet brain imaging technologies like functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI, suggest that on average, we use both sides of our brain equally. We are all brain ambidextrous.
So if there was ever a left brain or a right brain person, it would be the two personalities cohabitating the skull of a split brain patient. For the rest of us, these labels are as fictional as Harry Potter.
Oh, and that thing about only using 10% of your brain, you can throw that one in the garbage too. Hey guys, thanks for watching. Subscribe to Professor Dave Explains.
And make sure to check out Knowing Neurons.
So they talked there
right?
briefly about the corpus callosum, and it's the bridge that connects your left and right hemispheres of your brain. Okay. Now, when I used to work at a school for kids that had special learning needs, and I had a student there who had a condition called agenesis of corpus callosum. What do you think agenesis of corpus callosum would mean? Break down the words.
Oh, wait.
Agenesis.
They can only use one side of their brain.
No. What would agenesis mean? Think about it. Think to yourself, what's genesis? And when you put A in front of it, what does that mean?
Genesis is a car.
Genesis is a car.
That's critical.
So Genesis is the start or building or beginning of something. Thus, the Genesis book in the Bible, right, the beginning. And then agenesis would mean didn't begin or form or start. So she was born with no corpus callosum. It didn't form. And she had two streams of consciousness. And it was very difficult for her because she could hear her other thoughts like in her brain. So she would be focused in class and you would see her trying to follow, and then do this kind of thing. Because she would get so frustrated that the other conversations that she said, the other voices, the other half of her brain were talking like your normal stream of consciousness. Oh, I got to go home and I got to do this. And I get like, you think that you're like, no, focus. Well, you can focus and cut off that part. She couldn't. She had both things going at one time. It was really difficult for her. I cannot imagine. But she's the only person I've ever known like that. They used to do this thing where they severed the corpus callosum way back in the day when they were doing some seriously medieval brain surgeries like lobotomies and whatever else. So that's the same idea. So the cerebrum is the largest region of the brain. Cerebellum, sorry, is the second largest region of the brain, and it receives information about muscle and joint position and coordinates the actions of the muscles. So this is the part of your brain that's responsible for stuff like balance. You don't fall over, you stand up and walk, and processing how you're moving in space. And then your brain stem is what connects your brain and spinal cord. So it's going to regulate the flow of information between the brain and the body. So your brain stem has different anatomy within it. And that was what my dad's last stroke was. It was a brain stem stroke. And usually people don't even survive them because obviously this is the big connection point between your brain and the rest of your body, right? Through your spinal cord. So it caused him a lot of damage in how his brain functions, how he thinks, how he remembers things, how he reasons, which he doesn't really reason very well anymore. So that's what happened. It's sort of interesting the way it impacted him. So your brainstem looks like this. And like I said, it has different parts. It has thalamus, midbrain. This is all brainstem, medulla, spinal cord. And this thing right here called the pons, that's where he had his stroke. Right there in the pons, he had this whole big blood vessel burst and bleed in, and it affected this part of his brain. So this is your brain, again, in your lobes. This is a lateral view. So this is exactly like if they just cut this body in half like this, right down the middle. So you've got your frontal lobe, your parietal lobe, your occipital lobe, your cerebellum, and your temporal lobe, and they're all broken down into different things. You do have this little thing underneath called your olfactory bulb. What do you think an olfactory bulb does? Anybody know what your olfactory sense is? Smell. So that's your little, you have a little bit there for smelling and all these different things. It's right here. It's kind of directly from your nose, but it's right under there. So you have all this stuff going on. And then if you were to cut that brain in half and really look inside, you would see you have your cerebrum, you have this kind of open space in here. And then you have, this is your hypothalamus, you have a pituitary gland, which is part of your endocrine system. You have your pons, your medulla. This is all brainstem. There's your cerebellum. They call this midbrain in here, thalamus. And then you have these ventricles. These are sort of like these openings in here. And then this is your corpus callosum, this big thing here that connects everything together. So the student I had was just completely missing this part. Now there is a YouTube channel, I don't remember the name of it, but I'll try to remember to put it in your email this week. But it's a human anatomy channel, and they get, if you don't mind the kind of thing that they do, they actually work with cadavers, but they show you what they're studying on cadavers. So they don't like show the whole person or the face or whatever, but they show the part they're working on. So they'll show you tendons in a leg, and these are human cadavers. So cadavers are people who've donated their body to science, and then they've gone through the same kind of preservation process as all of our dissectable things have gone through. And doctors in med school work on them because you got to really see what the body looks like and get in it. One of them is anomalies they found, things they found that are different or changed or whatever. And it's really kind of neat. Speaking of anomalies, your brain, like you're saying, language is usually in your left frontal, like over here, sorry, but it's not always. It's not always. Generally it is. So like if you have an accident and you hurt this part of your brain, they're going to predict you're going to have some difficulty with language, but your brain can develop in different ways. So, and some parts of your brain don't do as much as other parts. So I have a friend I've known for 30 years, 40 years, probably most of my life. And she was severely epileptic. So she had seizures all the time. And they were weird seizures. Like the first thing she would do is take off her shoes. And sometimes she did this, they called it ironing, like her hand would just move and she'd be spaced out. But she would take off her shoes, she would hide her shoes, and then she would go for a walk out the door, bye. And this was actually a seizure. Like you think about people thrashing around. She wasn't. She would just walk, and her brain was not functioning properly at the time. And she'd either come back to reality, either like sitting on a sidewalk somewhere and have to remember how to get home. And then she could never find her shoes when she got home because she had no memory of hiding them. So when she was in her late 20s, they did a surgery on her at the medical school nearby that was kind of new. They went in and they did all these EEGs to determine where the electrical activity in her brain was going wrong. So that measures all that. They found the part of her brain that was causing her problems. They localized it to a very small part. They went in and they froze it with freezing spray. And the reason they did that is because they wanted to see if she lost any kind of function. Like, could she still walk? Could she still talk? Could she do math? Could she write? Could she do all these things? Can she remember people? Stuff like that. And thank God, by a major blessing and miracle, she still retained all of her skills. So after it thawed, they went in and physically cut out that chunk of her brain, cut it out. And she hasn't seized since. And that's incredible because she lived her until she couldn't get a driver's license. You know, it was wild. So let's move on a little bit. So here's your human brain. Here's a quick little video on this. This one was pretty good and it's pretty short.
The human brain. The human brain controls all bodily functions and works like a network that releases messages to different parts of the body. An average human brain weighs about 3 pounds. It has many folds and roots, which are used for storing and passing information. The brain is protected with the help of the bones of the skull. The meninges are a cushioned layer of membrane, which, along with the cerebrospinal fluid, protect the brain. The brain is divided into 3 parts, known as the forebrain, midbrain, and the hindbrain. The forebrain is the largest and most complex part of the brain. It consists of folds and roots and is also referred to as the cerebrum. The forebrain contains information related to human intelligence, memory, personality, emotions, speech, and the ability to feel and move. The cerebrum is again divided into 2 parts, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. The left hemisphere is considered to be logical, analytical, and objective, and the right hemisphere is thought to be more intuitive, creative, and subjective. The midbrain acts as the master coordinator of all the messages going in and coming out of the brain to the spinal cord and is located underneath the middle of the forebrain. The hindbrain consists of the cerebellum and medulla, and it sits underneath the back end of the cerebrum. The cerebellum is responsible for balance, movements, and coordination. The cerebellum means little brain in Latin. The pons and the medulla, along with the midbrain, are often called the brainstem. It sends out and coordinates all of the brain's messages. It also controls other automatic bodily functions like breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, swallowing, digestion, and blinking of the eyes. The different centers of the brain help us to form different activities. The cerebrum helps us in the movements of our body. Involuntary actions like the heartbeat, breathing, and swallowing are controlled with the help of the medulla.
So you can see why a stroke in the pons would be bad, right? Because it controls things like they said, like your heartbeat, your breathing. So that's why most people with those kind of strokes don't survive. So it was amazing that my dad did, really amazing. So this is your peripheral nervous system. Here's your CNS and here's your PNS, right?
CNS doesn't need
Yeah,
it's not necessary.
there you go. So you got sensory division. So peripheral nervous system is all the nerves associated and associated cells that are not part of brain and spinal cord, made up of your sensory division and the motor division. These are the 2 parts here of your peripheral nervous system. You have sensory and motor. So the sensory division transmits impulses from sense organs to the central nervous system. And the sensory receptors are cells that transmit information about changes in the internal, external environment. So these are the types that you have, okay? You have chemoreceptors. They respond to chemicals. So that would be chemicals that you touch. It would also be chemicals that you smell or that get in your eyes. You've got it would also be taste. You've got photoreceptors, so we're going to respond to light, right? And you've got mechanoreceptors. So these are things that respond to pressure, touch, vibrations, and stretching. All of these things are mechanoreceptors. And then thermoreceptors are going to respond to temperature changes. And lastly, you've got pain receptors. So these respond to tissue injury. These tell you, yo, this hurts. Now there's a super rare disorder where some people are born without pain receptors. That's terrible because they hurt themselves all the time because they don't know how far they're pushing themselves. Pain receptors are good. They let you know, hey, stop doing this. It's going to hurt you, right? But people without pain receptors, they break bones, they get sprains. It's pretty rough. Yep. So the motor division, which is divided into your somatic and autonomic nervous system. They transmit impulses from your CNS to your muscles and your glands. So how does this work? Seems complicated, right? So your somatic nervous system, somatic means body. So it regulates processes that are under voluntary control. So this is stuff you intend to do. Like I am picking up my phone and I am putting it down. That's all voluntary. Your autonomic is going to be a little different. So your actions of your somatic nervous system, sometimes they're called reflexes, like the reflexes are also, even though it's not voluntary, it's still part of that system because it's part of your motor system. And these occur automatically, and impulses controlling these actions are often called a reflex arc. And this is just like an image of a reflex arc right here, where it's like, you see these sensory receptors are like, oh, my toe has touched, that goes all the way up here, comes back down, and it's like, now you roll your next foot forward. You don't think about that, but it's happening. So hold on, I'm watching the time. So you also have your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. So this is interesting. So your autonomic nervous system, these are parts of your autonomic nervous system. So these deal with activities that are involuntary, and you've got sympathetic and parasympathetic. Sympathetic isn't, sad for you or happy for you. That's not what it means. So your sympathetic nervous system does all of these things right here, which are not voluntary. You can control like your blinking of your eyes and things, but look at this. Can you control whether your pupils are dilating or not? You can't control that. It happens, but you can't control it. And then it does stuff like relaxing your lungs, stimulating glucose production and whatnot, okay? Now, also you've got your parasympathetic, and your parasympathetic is going to do stuff like constrict your pupils, stimulate saliva, release bile. So these work together, but they're part of your autonomic because these are automatic. You can think of autonomic as automatic, and you can think of the somatic stuff as being stuff that you do with your body. So I may come back to that. Let me see. Because is that the last one? I think is it the last slide? No, a little bit more. So I'll save that one for you guys for your slideshow. So for your email. Accidents and injuries, this is pretty quick. So these are all brain scans of accidents or injuries to the brain. And you can tell, for example, this one that's so white, that's liquid, that's fluid, so that's blood in there. That's a bleed in the brain. And some of these look like there's almost like holes or missing matter. Like that might be like a gunshot wound or something. So you can see that none of this is good, right? You don't want any of that going on. And lastly, the drugs and alcohol bit. I do want to show them this as well. So I'm going to bring them in for a minute. Hey, y'all, would you come in here for a minute before we start lab? So they didn't have this section in their book. So in your nervous system section in your book, you didn't really have a whole lot here on drugs and alcohol. So this was really kind of neat. So come all the way in. You can come all the way in. So I wanted to share this one with you guys. So drugs are bad. Yeah, drugs are bad. I'm with you. So these are really interesting. So first off, this shows, let me move this out of the way. Oh, hang on, this went here. Let me move this out of the way. No, it's actually, now this is what you're talking about, an axon terminal and then a dendrite. So these are your synapses. So drugs and alcohol can bind to these receptors, all right? And then what happens is over time, if it continues to bind, it causes that neuron to die. So this is why some people who have like drug dependency problems start to have issues with how they think or function. Cole, Michael, all right, and Ethan. And then also, this is why like people who abuse alcohol have the same kind of problems. You can actually get neuron death. That's not good.
your liver can also die.
Yep. And it also depends on what kind of drug you're doing. Some drugs don't have the same effect. Others have a really terrible effect. Some of them are going to accelerate your nervous system. Some of them are going to slow your nervous system down. So this one here, these are brain scans of a cocaine abuser. So this is somebody right here, a normal brain scan. You can see this is activity. Okay. So this is brain activity. So all the light shows the brain is active and it's doing things. This is somebody who abused it for 10 days. Cocaine abuse for 10 days. Do you see how much less activity their brain is? That's because the other neurons are dead. Kaput. And you've got a cocaine abuser here for 100 days. So that shows you the difference. Now, neurons, when they die, some of them can regrow, but it takes a long time, which is why, like when I have this nerve damage now, they're telling me it could be between 1 and 3 years before I get normal function. That's how long it's going to take for motor neurons to regrow, not necessarily like brain neurons. That's even different. But there was this whole conversation about this reminded me of this famous 1980s commercial. You've probably seen it, but it's worth sharing because it was almost a goofy commercial, but everybody remembers it. There was a huge push in the 80s to make sure teenagers didn't go on drugs, didn't stay on drugs. And most of it was pushed by Nancy Reagan. Like Nancy Reagan had this big, her big thing. Every first lady takes on a thing, right? They all take on a thing. Like Laura Bush did libraries and Barbara Bush did roses and hold on. So Nancy Reagan did just say no to drugs. Okay, that's like a nice, easy catchphrase, but that really doesn't work as well as you'd hope it would because just say no is awfully simple and drugs are a complicated thing. Yeah.
Does this one have a goat in it?
This one does not have the goat. So what?
The reason they don't push it anymore is because the drug companies want to keep buying it so I can get more money.
Well, there's those. But we're talking about illicit drugs. So what we're talking about in this case is illegal drugs or street drugs. And the opinion of some of them have changed. Like as you've noticed, if you look at some of these 80s, Cole, if you look at some of these 80s speeches and commercials and things like that, they will put marijuana in the same category as things like cocaine and speed and whatever else. Now, if you notice, like almost half the country is legalized recreational marijuana because there have been more studies that show that it doesn't kill your neurons necessarily like some of these other ones do. And that it has there can be some benefits for pain and things like that. So they've done more studying, they changed their mind, but they still note things like cocaine, methadone, heroin, what's the one around here? Everybody abuses Oxycontin, and crystal meth, those kinds of things are just, there's no benefit. There's no benefit to them at all. There's actually been studies that show there's some benefit to LSD with people that have like post-traumatic stress and depression and things like that. But there's zero benefit to any of these other ones. So this is the famous 80s commercial that we all got to watch that was supposed to encourage us to never use drugs. And it seriously, this is like famous. So this is it. And it's worth, come on, do your thing, play. Why aren't you playing? Oh, don't do this to me. All right, no, hang on. I can go. That's okay. Hang on, I will go to YouTube because it is worth everybody seeing, because if you've never seen it, it's a like one of those cultural icon ones that you got to see.
By the way, did you know Will Smith?
Oh yes, I landed on my plane and that was the first thing I saw. It was pretty funny. I was like, what happened here? If somebody had told me that if somebody had told me that someone slapped Chris Rock at the Oscars, like Will Smith would have been the last person I would have guessed. So
His speech, it was all about like all this stuff.
Yeah.
And it's like
okay, so here it is. This is the original commercial. All right.
Is there anyone out there who still isn't clear about what doing drugs does? Okay, last time.
Have you never heard of this one?
This is your brain. This is drug. This is your brain on drugs. Any questions?
That was famous. Everybody went, huh? But it was a good one. So Anyway, I'm gonna let Sky go because she's on here. Goodbye, Sky. And we're gonna start her lab. So that commercial, and then there was another one that came out shortly after it.